Golden Blooded, everybody. And if you are a college football fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. That is all we do here every single day. And send gear to represent your team and yourself to Golden Blooded. I guarantee you, if you send it to me, I will put it in my background. Send your gear to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. Well, I had to do a car video today. My schedule kind of got backed up, so hopefully this is watchable. I've done several car videos and they've done pretty good. But today we are going to celebrate the losers, the worst teams in college football. Usually I make out my bottom 10, but this week there were so many bad teams that I had to do my bottom 15. Yeah. First, let's get to our dishonorable mentions. The first one, Oklahoma. What in the world is going on in Norman? Right now, they're 3-2. Wins over UTEP, Kansas State at Nebraska, and their 2 losses, Kansas State at home, and then an obliteration at TCU. Oklahoma, you get a dishonorable mention. Next up, Baylor. Baylor's not looking good right now. They're 3-2. Wins over FCS Albany, Wyoming, and at Iowa State. Their 2 losses at number 23 BYU and number 9 Oklahoma State. So those aren't horrible losses, and their stats aren't bad. But if they keep losing, they'll end up firmly on the list. Another dishonorable mention, Iowa. They're 3-2. How they have 3 wins, I don't know. Over FCS South Dakota State, Nevada, and at Rutgers. Losses against Iowa State, number 4 Michigan. The problem is their offense, scoring 16.4 points per game. That's 122nd. But a great defense, allowing 10 points per game. Third, get better on your offense. Next dishonorable mention is Rutgers. 3-2. Wins at Boston College, FCS Wagner, and at Temple. But now they've lost to Iowa and at number 3 Ohio State. Not looking good. Their stats are terrible. Close to being on my bottom 15, but not quite. Next dishonorable mention, Notre Dame. 2-2. Wins against Cal and at North Carolina. Losses at number 2 Ohio State and Marshall. The loss that keeps Notre Dame close to this list is Marshall, and their stats aren't great. But if they can pile up some wins, they will be firmly away from this list. Next dishonorable mention is going to be Cal. They're also 3-2. Wins against FCS, UC Davis, UNLV, and Arizona. Losses at Notre Dame and at Washington State. Their stats are terrible, but they're barely not on my bottom 15. Next dishonorable mention, South Carolina, also 3-2. Wins against Georgia State, Charlotte, and FCS South Carolina State. Losses at number 16 Arkansas and number 1 Georgia. Those aren't bad losses, but they got blown out in both losses. Their offensive stats aren't bad, but their defensive stats are horrible. Close to being on my actual bottom 15. Next dishonorable mention, Florida. They're 3-2. Wins over number 7 Utah. That's actually a decent win. USF and FCS Eastern Washington. Losses to number 20 Kentucky and at number 11 Tennessee. So not terrible losses, but their stats are horrible. Close to making my top 15, but you avoided it for this week. Next dishonorable mention, Vanderbilt 3-2. Wins at Hawaii, FCS Elon, and at Northern Illinois. Losses to number 23 Wake Forest and at number 2 Alabama. Their losses aren't terrible, and their stats aren't the worst except for their defense, allowing 33.8 points per game. That's 114th. But once again, Vanderbilt avoids my bottom 15. Next dishonorable mention, Texas A&M, also 3-2. Wins against FCS Sam Houston State, number 13 Miami, and number 10 Arkansas. Except number 13 Miami isn't ranked, and number 10 Arkansas isn't ranked anymore. So how good really are those wins? Losses to Appalachian State and at Mississippi State. Got obliterated at Mississippi State. Stats aren't good either. Defense is their best stat, allowing 17.8 points per game, 24th. Texas A&M, you do avoid my bottom 15, but I'm keeping my eye on you. Next dishonorable mention, Auburn 3-2. Wins against FCS Mercer, San Jose State, and Missouri. Losses against number 22 Penn State and LSU. Stats are horrible, but you barely missed the cut on my bottom 15. 2 more, guys, and then we'll get to my bottom 15. Next dishonorable mention, Miami, the Hurricanes, 2-2. Wins over FCS Bethune-Cookman and Southern Miss. Losses at number 24 Texas A&M and Middle Tennessee. Miami barely missed the cut for my bottom 15. Their stats are actually halfway decent, and that's what kept them afloat. Last and final dishonorable mention, Arizona. They made it off the list. They're 3-2. Wins at San Diego State, FCS North Dakota State, and Colorado, one of the worst teams in the nation. But their stats aren't good, so they're close to being on my bottom 15. Now it is time for my bottom 15. Here we go. Number 15 is Louisville. They are 2-3. Wins at UCF and USF. Losses at Syracuse, Florida State, and at Boston College. They're averaging 26.4 points per game. That's 9. And allowing 23.4 points per game. That's 60th. Louisville, you're not a very good team, but you're not the worst of the worst. So you're number 15. Number 14, Georgia Tech. They actually fell quite a ways. They were number 3 on the worst list. They're 2-3. Wins over FCS Western Carolina and at number 24 Pitt. That's what got you bumped down on this list. Losses to number 4 Clemson, number 20 Ole Miss, and at UCF, averaging 16.2 points per game, that's 123rd, and allowing 29.6 points per game, that's 92nd. You're a really, really bad team, but going on the road and beating Pitt helped you just a little bit this week. Number 13 on this list, Pitt. I had to put Pitt one notch higher than Georgia Tech because they lost to Georgia Tech. They do have a winning record, 3-2, but their wins include West Virginia, at Western Michigan, and FCS Rhode Island. Not exactly the best of wins. Losses to number 24 Tennessee, and a horrible loss to Georgia Tech, averaging 33 points per game, that's 54th, and allowing 25.6 points per game, that's 70th. I knew Pitt was going to take a step backwards this year. Number 12, Nebraska. Still on the list, but took a slide backwards because they got a win. Wins over FCS North Dakota and Indiana. There you go. Losses at Northwestern, Georgia Southern, and number 6 Oklahoma, averaging 31.4 points per game, that's 67th, and allowing 32.6 points per game, which is 107th. A win against Indiana gets you bumped lower on my list, but you're still on my list. Speaking of which, number 11, yes, they have a winning record, 3-2. I'm talking about Indiana wins over Illinois. That's Illinois' only loss. How did Indiana beat Illinois? I have no idea. FCS Idaho and Western Kentucky. Losses at Cincinnati and then at Nebraska. They're averaging 27.2 points per game, which is 87th, and allowing 30.4 points per game, which is 99th. Indiana is not a very good football team, but they could turn it around. They do have some good pieces over there. Now we're actually in my bottom 10. Coming in at number 10, Wisconsin. Wow, I did not think Wisconsin was going to make this list. They are 2-3, wins over FCS Southeast Missouri State and New Mexico State. Losses against Washington State, at number 3 Ohio State, and Illinois. They're averaging 29.8 points per game, which is 72nd, and allowing 22 points per game, which is 49th. And oh yeah, they fired their head coach, Paul Chryst. Wisconsin, you're a bottom 10 team right now. Not very good at all. Number 9, a newbie to this list, Missouri. Also 2-3, wins against Louisiana Tech and FCS Abilene Christian. Losses at Kansas State, at Auburn, and number 1 Georgia, averaging 26.8 points per game. They're 89th, allowing 24.8 points per game, which is 65th. Missouri is not a very good football team, but they're not as bad as what I thought they were. I was expecting them to be higher on this list, but their stats aren't horrific. They're bad, but not horrific. Number 8, Boston College. They actually fall a little bit on this list because they got a win. They're now 2-3. Wins over FCS Maine and Louisville. Losses to Rutgers, at Virginia Tech, and at Florida State, averaging 23.4 points per game, which is 103rd, and allowing 28.6 points per game, which is 88th. So yeah, really the only thing that saved you was beating Louisville. Number 7, this team, I knew they would take a step back, but I didn't realize how bad they were going to be this year. Michigan State, they're 2-3. Wins over Western Michigan and Akron. Losses at Washington, Minnesota, and at Maryland. They're averaging 27 points per game, which is 88th, and allowing 22.6 points per game, which is 54th. I knew Michigan State was going to take a step back because they had a terrible defense last year, and nothing told me it was going to be any better this year. And whenever Kenneth Walker missed a game last year, their offense took a massive step backwards, and guess what? He's gone. Michigan State, you suck now. Speaking of sucking, my team is number 6, West Virginia, 2-3. Wins over FCS Towson and Virginia Tech. Losses at Pitt, Kansas, and at Texas. Averaging 38.2 points per game, which is 25th. So there's a bright spot, but allowing 29.6 points per game, which is 94th. West Virginia is out of place on defense, and our receivers can't catch a ball. West Virginia is one of the worst teams in the nation right now. Number 5 is Virginia, staying in that Appalachian area. 2-3 right now. Wins over FCS Richmond and Old Dominion. Losses at Illinois, at Syracuse, and at Duke. They're averaging 18 points a game. Wow, that's 118. That surprises me because their head coach that came from Clemson was supposed to be offensive oriented. They're allowing 23 points per game, which is 56. Virginia is not off to a good start, and they're one of the worst teams in the nation. Staying in the Appalachian area, number 4, Virginia Tech. So the schools in Virginia and West Virginia in the Power 5 conferences all suck. Virginia Tech is 2-3. Wins over Boston College and Wofford. Losses at Old Dominion, West Virginia, and at North Carolina. They're averaging 18.2 points per game, which is 117th, but allowing 22.2 points per game, which is 51st. Virginia Tech is a very, very bad team. You could probably flip-flop Virginia and Virginia Tech interchangeable, but that's where I have them. Number 3, this is where we take a big step backwards as far as bad teams. Stanford, 1-3. Their only win is against FCS Colgate. Losses against number 10 USC, at number 18 Washington, and at number 13 Oregon. That's the only thing that kept them at the 3 spot and not the 2 spot. Strength of schedule. 29.5 points per game, 74th, allowing 34 points per game, 116th. They're not a very good football team no matter who they play. We have a tie at number 2. First team at number 2 is Northwestern. They're 1-4. Their only win, Nebraska Nebraska. That's not a very good win. Losses to Duke, FCS Southern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, and at number 11 Penn State. They're averaging 19.8 points per game, which is 114th. That's not a surprise for Northwestern because they usually don't have good offenses, but now they're allowing 24.8 points per game, which is 66. So a bad defense spells doomsday for Northwestern. Tied with them at number 2 is Arizona State, also 1-4. Their only win is over FCS Northern Arizona. Losses at number 11 Oklahoma State, Eastern Michigan, number 13 Utah, and at number 6 USC. Averaging 23.2 points per game, which is 104th, and allowing 28.6 points per game, which is 87th. They're just as terrible as Northwestern. They just fired their head coach Herm Edwards. So yeah, Arizona State and Northwestern tied for number 2. But holding their spot firmly at the number 1 spot, the worst team in all of college football in the Power 5 conferences, Colorado. They are now 0-5. 0 wins. Losses to TCU, at Air Force, at Minnesota, UCLA, and now at Arizona. Averaging a whopping 13.4 points per game, which is 128, and allowing 43.2 points per game, which is 129. That is bottom of the barrel. They started off the season with 4 straight losses by 25 or more points, where their 5th loss was only by 23 points to Arizona. Still, by far, the worst team in the nation whenever it comes to Power 5 conferences, Colorado. Y'all let me know in the comment section what you think about my loser list, and I'll leave anybody out. In what order would you have the worst teams in all of college football when it comes to Power 5 conferences? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next show.